morning, all. It's Friday. This is Bobo. He's not impressed with me holding him right now, so I'm going to let him go play. Welcome to Sit and Spin. I have this fascination with all things weird, mysterious, creepy. I love it. I love doing deep dives on the internet into all kinds of topics that I often just stumble across by chance. And, so I'm not actually wasting that time. I thought I would share those stories with you because I love telling stories. So, welcome to Sit and Spin. Today, we're going to be spinning a Warhol top from Paradise Fibers. We're going to be core spinning the merino, and we're going to save the flax to do a single spin to ply with the core spun later. You can see the technique on yesterday's video, but for today, we're going to core spin while I tell you the story of Bennington Triangle. Ooh, sounds creepy, kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. So if you want to grab some fiber and spin along, do that. Otherwise, you can just sit and listen while I tell you a tale. So let's spin a yarn. So what is the Bennington Triangle? So this is the name that's given to an area in Vermont between the towns of Bennington and the two now ghost towns of Glastonbury and Somerset. A New England author named Joseph A. Citrio dubbed it that in his 1992 book, Passing Strange, True Tales of New England Hauntings and Horrors. So he gave it this name after 5 people went missing between the years of 1945 and 1950. All right, so 5 people. Doesn't seem that strange, but okay. Located in the Green Mountain National Forest and centered on Glastonbury Mountain, the area was a booming logging area, but it's now mostly abandoned by all save hikers and thrill seekers. Indigenous people believed the Glastonbury wilderness was haunted by evil spirits. They only used the area as a burial ground. They said Glastonbury Mountain was where the 4 winds met in eternal struggle. Now, it turns out there's some truth to this. The winds are so erratic on the mountain that the weather can literally change in an instant. And all the plants grow at odd angles, which, doesn't seem like it would be that big a deal. But if you're a hiker or an outdoor enthusiast, whether you realize it or not, you're mentally cataloging how the plants grow and using that to help you navigate. So if they're not growing in the normal fashion and they're all over the place, that could throw off your internal navigation. The indigenous peoples also had legends of an enchanted stone, one that if you stepped on it, it would swallow you whole. And of course, there's always been reports of strange lights in the Glastonbury area, and these reports go back as far as the 1800s. There's also tales of a hairy man-like creature, Bigfoot in other words, and there's been reports of sightings as recently as 2003. Now, there was a cave-dwelling wild man alive there in 1867. He used to come into town and he'd pull back his long coat and he'd flash his junk at the people while wildly waving around his pistol before retreating back to the forest. Somehow I don't think this is who they're referring to when they're talking about Bigfoot. Before we look at the 5 disappearances that earned the area the name the Glastonbury Triangle, I should mention a couple of other deaths that are often lumped in to this legend. In 1892, there was a mill worker named Henry McDowell, and one day he suddenly bludgeoned a coworker to death with a rock because he heard voices telling him to do it. Obviously, he was committed to an asylum, But he escaped from there and was never seen again. Perhaps he returned to the woods. Only 5 years after that murder, John Harbour, a prominent citizen in the area, went hunting in a place called Bickford Hollow. He was found dead of a gunshot wound, and his body was dragged several yards to be propped against a tree, his fully loaded shotgun next to him. Now, who shoots a guy and then props him against a tree? It's kind of weird. This murder has never been solved, and the fact that he didn't even get a shot off to defend himself leads to paranormal speculation. But let's look at the cause of all the brouhaha. The disappearances that got it the name the Bennington Triangle. The first disappearance was an experienced old woodsman by the name of Mitty Rivers. Isn't that a great name? Mitty Rivers. He sounds like a bushman. He was 74 years old, but he was still working as a hunting guide, and he'd only just received like a clean bill of health from his doctor. The man was like in impeccable shape. He's one of those rugged old men who can never be slowed down. My husband's grandfather was like that. He was 92 years old when he passed, and until then he'd been living alone in a house heated only by wood in Canada, of all places. And for fun, he rebuilt steam engines, like big steam engines. He loved them. That was his passion. These are like amazingly tough men. So on November 12th, 1945, Mitty was working, guiding a group of 4 hunters up the mountain. As they're heading back to the camp, Mitty got ahead of the others because, he's just in better shape than they are. So he hurried on ahead, and they figured they'd just find him waiting for them at camp. But when they got back to camp, he wasn't there. He was just gone. So they quickly rustled up a search, and they started scouring the mountain. All they ever found was a single unfired rifle cartridge in a stream. They figured that Mitty bent over to get a drink of water and it had fallen out of his pocket. But other than that, they never found Mitty. No sign of him was ever seen. That was it. Just poof, gone. The next to disappear was a young woman named Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College. Now, she's likely the most famous of the disappearances. We'll get into why later. But on December 1st, 1946, after working a shift in the college cafeteria, she told her roommate, Elizabeth Parker, that she was going to go up to the Long Trail, which is the actual name of the trail. They just, so creative. They call it the Long Trail because it's a long trail. So this is an actual trail in the Green Mountain Park. Going for hikes was how she relaxed. So she hitched rides to the trail entrance, and once she got up to the Green Mountain, what do they call that? The Green Mountain Park. She got directions to the trailhead from a man who happened to be an employee at the Bennington Banner newspaper. He was returning from a hike, so he gave her directions on how to get on the trail from where they were. So we know that she made it to the trail. She was also spotted on the trail by an older couple who say she was about 100 yards ahead of them on the trail, and they were following along behind as she rounded a bend. When they rounded the bend, they expected to see her again, but she was gone. Many searches were made, but she was never found. Her disappearance did lead to Vermont forming its own state police, however. At the time of her vanishing, there was only one state investigator, and it was felt that that wasn't anywhere near enough to handle all of the cases in the state. This case also inspired Shirley Jackson to write her book, Hangs a Man. Shirley Jackson wrote Haunting of Hill House. She's a very famous sort of psychological terror writer. She'd been living in Bennington when Weldon disappeared, and the mystery just struck a chord with her. There were many theories about Weldon, including that she eloped with her boyfriend, but there's never been anything proven. She was just gone. The next case is perhaps the weirdest and the hardest to believe, but there are documents and police interviews to back it up. Exactly 3 years to the day after Weldon disappeared, veteran James Tedford was returning to the Bennington Soldiers' Home from nearby St. Albans, where he had been visiting relatives. He was on the local bus, and at the last rest stop, he was definitely accounted for. He was seen by the other passengers and the bus driver getting back on and taking his seat. But when the bus arrived in Bennington, after driving through the wilderness, he was gone. His belongings were still on the overhead rack, and his bus schedule lay open on his seat, but Tedford wasn't there. There was no way he could have gotten off the bus, and everyone swore he was there when they left the last rest stop. What could possibly happen to the old man? No sign of him was ever found. He was just gone. Now, the youngest to ever go missing was Paul Jepson. He was only 8 on October 12, 1950. His parents tended to the local dump. Now, this was the 50s, and back then they used to keep a herd of pigs at the dump to recycle in the old-fashioned way. So his mom was going to tend to the pigs, and she left him in the truck, told him, "Stay there, and I'll be right back." When she returned, he was gone. Now, there's some debate on how long she was gone. Some say she was only a few minutes. Others say she was gone an hour. Regardless, Paul was gone. They figured it'd be pretty quick to find him. I mean, young boys don't wander too far, and he was wearing a bright red coat, so they should be able to spot him easily. But despite a lot of searches, no trace of him was ever found. There is a local story that says they took bloodhounds out and tracked him, and that they tracked him to a nearby road where 4 years earlier, Weldon had been hitching rides. But this is just a story. If he was tracked there, of course, he could have been picked up by a predator. That wasn't something that was studied or common knowledge in those days. Regardless, he was never found. The last case of the Bennington Triangle was 50-year-old Frida Langer. On October 28, 1950, Frida was camping with family near the Somerset Reservoir, which is deep in the Bennington Triangle. Her cousin, Herbert Elsner, said, "Hey, let's go for a hike." She was like, "Sure," but only a half mile or so in, she fell in a stream. Totally feel you, sister. That would be exactly what I would do. Coordination is not my strong suit. Now, it's late October. It's pretty chilly. She can't continue on this hike all wet. So she tells Herbert, "I'm just going to run back to the camp." It's only a half mile or so away. And she was an active woman. So she's like, "I'll run back to camp. I'll get changed, come back here, and we'll continue on our hike." Herbert's like, "Sure, sounds fine." So he sat and waited. But after what he thought was a sufficient amount of time for her to make it there and back, and she still hadn't turned up, he figured he'd walk back to the camp and either meet her on the way or find out what had delayed her. But when he gets back to the camp, of course, no one has seen her since she left to go on the hike with him. They started searching. Over the course of 2 weeks, there were over 300 people involved, along with airplanes and helicopters. But no trace of her was found. That is, until May 12th, 1951. Hikers found her body near the reservoir in a wide open area. There was no way searchers could have missed her body when they searched that area extensively just 7 months earlier. So, how did her body get there? Did the killer return and dump the corpse? Was there even a killer? There is a report that one deputy said her body was so preserved she could have died just the day before. But the coroner's report said she was so decomposed that they couldn't determine the cause of death. This was the only body of the 5 cases that was ever found. But the discovery was so weird that it's included with the other disappearances. So what's actually happening in the Bennington Triangle? There are theories. Oh, yes, there are theories. Some, of course, are tinfoil hat crazy. But let's have a look anyways. Looking back on the indigenous legends, there's speculation that the enchanted rock that you step on and it swallows you whole, they speculate that it actually exists and that these people had stepped on it and been swallowed whole. But that wouldn't explain James Tedford, who disappeared from the bus. No problem. Let's adjust the theory a little bit. The rock was only thought to be enchanted because someone was witnessed disappearing when stepping onto the rock. But what if what actually happened is there's an interdimensional portal that randomly opens around Glastonbury Mountain, and these people just step through it? James, on a moving bus, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and was sucked through the portal. Frida's body reappeared because the portal opened and dumped her in that field after the searches were over. Next, they say there's an alien base on Glastonbury Mountain, and that the aliens come out once in a while and abduct people for butt probes. Why these people are never returned, like most abductees, they don't have any idea. They just think the aliens are taking them into their little space station in Glastonbury Mountain. The only connections really between these cases is the time of year, late autumn to early winter, and that it's all in a rough area around Glastonbury Mountain. So really, these theories could be possible. But, the cases could also be completely unrelated. This is a remote, rugged region. People disappear all the time, and you can't search every inch of the terrain. But if they are related, there are a few more likely theories that aren't near as much fun, but we'll discuss them anyways. There was a lot of mining done in the region, and there are a lot of abandoned homes. So these people could have fallen into old mine shafts or wells and were never found. They could be under fallen trees or down ravines or buried under debris that just happens in forests. If they were lost and developed hypothermia, they may have crawled into a hidden spot trying to find warmth and passed away while they were in there. Normal methods of dying in the wilderness. And there's one more theory that's gained a little bit of traction, and that's that a couple of the deaths could be from an unknown serial killer. There are 2 similar cases linked to Paula Weldon to support this theory. In 1936, Catherine Hull, a 22-year-old stenographer, vanished near Lebanon Springs, New York. This is less than 40 miles from Bennington. She was last spotted hitchhiking, and 7 years later, hunters found a skull in a nearby wooded area that was confirmed to be hers by dental records. The second female, this one a lot younger, went missing from a summer camp at Lakeville, Connecticut. This was about 70 miles away from Bennington. So Connie Smith was only 10 years old at the time, just a baby. She was last seen walking and hitchhiking along the state's main road by locals, but no trace of her was ever found. I'm no behavioral scientist, but I do watch Criminal Minds. That makes me an expert, doesn't it? This does seem like a widespread of time for only 3 killings. And the ages seem a bit off for a serial killer. They do tend to have preferences, but of course there's the BTK killer, who is an exception to all commonalities, so anything is possible. But then you look at the distances. Was it that easy to travel from the 30s and 50s? I really have no idea. It's possible. I can't really form an opinion on that, despite my expertise with Criminal Minds, so it's just a theory. The reality is the cases probably aren't really connected. They're just being linked by happenstance. But since the world would be boring without a little bit of wonder, I'm going to believe in the interdimensional portal floating around. So if you decide to go hiking in the Bennington Triangle, just remember, be very, very careful. I hope you enjoyed a good yarn, and I'll see you next week.